But first, our top story goes to the Bureau of Labor Statistics as they just released their latest employment numbers this morning, and John Kingston is here to talk about those numbers. John, thanks for joining us this morning.
How you doing, everybody?
Good, and you. And with this, these are hot off the press, so what can you tell us?
Kind of boring this month. It's a welcome change. You know, the numbers have been swinging so much, you know, with yellow and everything, that this really didn't do much of anything. The November jobs were up 700 jobs, 1,581,300 jobs, up from a revised October number. The October number, in turn, was revised up 2,000. But if you remember, September and October dropped considerably relative to September. So with some September revisions, we are now below. We're now about 3,000 jobs below September. You know, this is kind of like the most stable it's been for a while. I haven't really looked at the comparison, but my guess is that in a 3 to 4 month period, probably the last three, because of course August into September is when you had the impact from yellow. This is kind of probably the most stable it's been for a while. So at least for now, we'll say we look like we've hit some kind of equilibrium without a lot of decline. The number that I thought was most interesting were the warehouse numbers. Now that really, those numbers are really plummeting. So, and by the way, these are all seasonally adjusted numbers. So November came in at 1,861,000. That's down from 1,869,100. So that's down 8,000 jobs. From the final September number, we're down more than 20,000 jobs. I mean, that's just an incredible drop. I really don't know what would cause that. I would think, I don't know why there's such a huge divergence where we seem to have hit some stability in trucking, but we're way down on warehouses. But there's no doubt about that. You know, I don't really even know what the peak is on warehouses. I'll have to take a look. But the peak was way in the rearview mirror. We are so far down from where we were at the peak, which was sometime last year. So I think that's the most interesting thing. The numbers are small. I haven't really looked at them yet, but rail showed a little bit of a decline, and I can't help but find that noticeable. I was at the Rail Trends conference a few weeks ago, in which the outgoing STB chair, whose name escapes me now, ripped into mostly the new CEO, Mr. Vina of UP, for cutting jobs. And here we have, after jobs have been, it took a big move up about 4,000 a while ago and kind of held that number, and now we're down again. So I'm not really sure what that's all about.
And John, with the overall report, we're seeing that it's at 3.7%. And when we're looking at some of those breakdowns that you mentioned, warehousing, could you talk to the expectations for usually this time of the year, especially when we're looking at within the supply chain, goods still coming in, trickling in, holiday season, things like that? Is this almost always look like a little bit more of a shock during this time of the year?
I mean, it's a good question because I haven't really looked historically. I mean, the warehouse numbers have been so volatile that I really even wonder what the norm is anymore. You know, we went through a massive warehouse build, which obviously means a lot of employers. And then we had so many people hired in warehouses to take care of all the e-commerce demands through the pandemic, and they've been bleeding jobs ever since. I'll look at the numbers, and this will be in my story today that we'll publish on freightwaves.com. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is the biggest decline, the biggest 1 month decline in jobs in quite some time. This is a lot of jobs lost.
John, remember, I think it was a couple of months ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we had just like a massive wave in terms of like a big drop and a big gain, or perhaps vice versa as well. And it seems like this is a bit of a change in the norms, just because, as you said, this seems to be more stable than it has been in recent history. Any oddity to the fact that we were so volatile and now so stable?
Yeah, no, that's definitely something to note here, that we were extremely volatile with big moves, and then of course fueled by the pandemic and fueled by all the e-commerce buying and heavy freight demand. Then it looked like we were going to start to bleed out a lot of jobs, as we knew that we started to go into a freight recession. But at least on the jobs front, at least the last 3 months have been relatively steady. So I think that's notable. I don't know. Does that mean we maybe hit some kind of an equilibrium? I guess it's possible.
And John, we're looking at the unemployment rate within just transportation. It's at 4.1%, just over the 3.7% overall. We're looking at this segment. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, of course, was yellow. Real quick, can you go over some of the variances that we've seen from that yellow closure and what some of those numbers look like over that period of time?
Well, I think I am trying to do this off the top of my head. Always a scary place. I think that first month that yellow went down, number of jobs dropped. I want to say 30,000. Easily the biggest decline. I mean, the second biggest decline after what happened with the start of the pandemic. And then they kind of clawed some back. There were some big revisions. So this is the kind of thing, as we know, Anthony and Bill, we've discussed this, that they don't count jobs like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They model. That doesn't mean that they have no counting of jobs, but they model. So I would imagine that modeling the impact from yellow was pretty tough. Now, the reports that Todd Maiden have been doing this week about the interim LTL status numbers are showing that most of that volume, I think, is still being held on to. The companies that could claim a bit of in some cases, significant pickup from the yellow demise. So at a certain point, you're going to need the drivers for that too. So if they were holding steady, it kind of makes sense, at least on the LTL stats, that will take a 1 month lag, that they would be starting to stabilize as well.
John, correct me if I'm wrong as well here, but this is also the situation, as you read these numbers, these are not seasonal as well. So in other words, when you have these large parcel carriers that have added on, 5 digits worth of jobs just for this particular time of year, that's not going to be impacted by these numbers, or these numbers aren't going to be impacted by those numbers as we get into the December and the January report when it comes out.
Well, no, it would be impacted, but I mean, this would be in their seasonal model. Based on history, they will say, okay, seasonally, we're going to smooth out these numbers, and we know that in November the following things happen. So, let me tell you, on the not seasonally adjusted numbers, they were really quiet. Okay, October was revised up about 2,200 jobs. And November not seasonally adjusted jobs were up 100. No, we're down 100 jobs from October. So they've quieted down as well. And the final revision of September from what it was hardly anything at all either. So I think the not seasonally adjusted jobs are also kind of showing some stability now in the level of truck transportation employment.
And John, of course, while we have you here, I have to ask you about the latest in the energy sector and what are your outlooks going into the next week?
Oh, next week. Wow. Well, as you know, we're way down. I know we don't track gasoline here, but the price of RBOB, which is the gasoline intermediate product that kind of serves as a proxy for gasoline trading on the CME Commodity Exchange, ticked under $2 yesterday for the first time in who knows when. Diesel was down as well. We are down on diesel on the DOE price about $1.70. I'm sure it'll come down $1.70 from its high of June of 2022. Look, every model is showing an excess of supply of crude next year. The models show an increase in demand. An increase in supply that exceeds the increase in demand. A big reason for that is the U.S., which is just having an absolutely banner year in production. 13.2 million barrels a day of crude, actually dropped a little bit this week. There's a monthly report that is a little more accurate than the weekly report, but the report I'll get my month straight here. The report for September affirmed the weekly report from that month. Total hydrocarbon production, which includes things like butane and propane and biofuels, was a record in September. I mean, this industry I know that this is not the narrative, the political narrative in some circles, but the oil industry right now is just blasting away. And as some commentators said yesterday, neither political party wants to talk about it. The Republicans don't want to talk about it because they've produce this narrative that Joe Biden is killing the industry. And the Democrats don't want to talk about it because there's a significant segment of the Democratic Party that despises the oil industry. So we've got this gigantic success story of the U.S. Oil sector going gangbusters. And politically, it's a hot potato for both parties. I mean, this is just bizarre.
Really, really interesting, especially as we get into these colder months. You just obviously see fuel prices start to escalate, you would think anyway. John, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you.
John Kingston joining us there with our BLS Employment Numbers report for the month. Right now, let's go over to the wall for our first carrier update of the morning with Donnie and Tony.